Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today it is time to do another 5 AAF Football to United Football League video. But this time, we're not talking about players, we're talking about staff members. Whether they be part of the coaching staff, or whether they be part of the front office. We have seen multiple people go from the AAF to the UFL, and so let's get started by talking about the biggest one of them all, Daryl Johnston. Now, Moose is clearly the poster child for AAF to UFL. In the AAF, he was the general manager of the San Antonio Commanders. The Commanders would be, one of the winning teams of the league. While they didn't have a great point differential, they did finish with a 5-3 record, which would have probably got them into the playoffs, pending how the last couple of weeks of the season would have gone on. Then in 2020, he would become the director of player personnel for the Dallas Renegades. Now, the Renegades would go 2-3 that season with a negative 12-point differential, but at the time of the league shutting down, they were tied with the Wildcats for that 2-3 record. And then would go on to go to the USFL. And in the USFL, he would originally be the executive vice president of football operations, but would become the head honcho himself, the president in 2023, in a move that I called, mainly due to the fact that heading into 2023 and after 2022, he was doing all the press for the league. He was showing up to the new cities like Michigan and Memphis. He was the one who was talking about the league, and when he was named president, it was not a shock at all to me. He has been one of the biggest key players in spring football, basically since the USFL in 2022, and has been around since the AAF with the Commanders. And what has he done with the UFL? Well, he is now one of the higher ups in that league as well. He is the executive vice president of football operations. Again, basically second in command to Russ Brandon. But just like with the USFL, he's basically been, aside from arguably Danny Garcia, the real face of the league. He's the one that's been showing up, doing most podcasts, doing most news interviews, showing up to a lot of events. Again, him and Danny have become what most people would agree on are the big two members of the UFL's higher up front office when it comes to actually representing and showing up for the league. And while it's not always been great, as certain things have been controversial that he said, that's kind of part of what's been a big deal for him being here. Just like normal, he's always been there. And while Russ is the highest of the higher ups that isn't an owner, Moose is once again just continuing what he did in the USFL in 2023. He's been the guy showing up to everything. He was at the opening of the Arlington headquarters. He was talking to the press after the championship game. He was one who was on the news talking about the showboats and a lot of other things. He's one that's done his best to give his honest opinions, feeling somebody who really just is pretty honest. Even rules that he's not a fan of, like them changing the kickoff, he'll still talk about it in a very open and honest way, which is pretty commendable considering this era of sports and sports media that we're in. The fact is, he is one of the biggest faces for the league as well, considering he does do NFL games as a color commentator for Fox. And so it is a pretty cool thing to see a guy that was just a GM in the AF go on to become one of the highest of high-end people in the entire league's structure, being the executive VP, and was the president for the USFL. But he is not the only guy. Of course, we have another one in Donnie Abraham, Orlando Apollos to the St. Louis Battlehawks. Now, Donnie Abraham, this is a pretty impressive one right here. This is something I think a lot of people forget was even in the AAF. He was a defensive backs coach for the Orlando Apollos in 2019. Of course, the Apollos, led by head coach Steve Spurrier, the legendary college coach, and they were the best team in the league by a country mile. A 100-point differential despite only having 6 more wins than losses. And I say only, but that's insane to have that high point differential. 7-1 record, the best by far. And this team was pretty damn good when it came to getting interceptions. They weren't both DBs, but the team did have 2 of the very few guys that had 3 or more interceptions. One was a linebacker, one was a cornerback. And he was a big part, again, of making this defense as good as they were, becoming a team that would be the best overall in the league. Points allowed, aside from the Iron, they had the best points allowed in the entire league. And for how great this team was, of course, he would become famous with the St. Louis Battlehawks, where he has been the only defensive coordinator in the XFL 3.0 to UFL era, being the defensive coordinator in 2023 and up until 2025. And while the defense, its first year wasn't incredible, both 24 and 25, the Battlehawks are one of the best defenses in the league. In 2024, they finished with the 3rd best point differential, one of the best yards per game allowed. In 2025, I've called them the best defense in the league, and I still stand by that. Even though the playoff game didn't go their way, a lot of it was on the offense. In terms of the defense, Donnie was able to create a really great unit, especially considering the fact that the head coach is an offensive guy. It means that this defense really does fall on his shoulders. And 2 of his 3 seasons with the Battlehawks, he has put one of the 3 best defensive units in the entire league out there. If you want to be not nice, give him 4th for 24, that's fine. Even then, a top 50% unit, 2 of his 3 years with the Battlehawks, insanely impressive. He's been a huge reason why they've won so many games across the 3 seasons that they've been playing. So that's Donnie Abraham. But now we have his head coach, Anthony Becht. Anthony Becht went from the San Diego Fleet to the Battlehawks. Again, another one I think some people forget was a coach in the AAF. He was the tight ends coach of the San Diego Fleet, his first real big big coaching opportunity. And well, he did a pretty good job with them. Gavin Escobar, Marcus Baugh, and Ben Johnson all put up pretty solid stats for the team, especially Gavin Escobar. And Marcus Baugh is still around in spring football, of course, was pretty famous for what he was doing with the Panthers. So you have multiple guys that really play big impacts. Gavin Escobar, 176 yards. Marcus Baugh, 208. And then Ben Johnson, 75. Guys who all had over 10 receptions. He was the coach for those guys. And the San Diego Fleet, of course, had the 3rd best overall offense when it comes to yards per game. And did put up over 158 points, being one of the better teams in terms of scoring. Very solid team, all things considered. And a big part of that was him, helping coach those tight ends to be really solid. Being able to have not 1, not 2, but 3 tight ends having over double-digit receptions is insanely impressive. Almost basically half of their guys that had 10 receptions did, because you only had 4 guys who weren't tight ends. So insanely impressive. But of course, his big fame is with the Battlehawks, where he has been the only head coach in the 3.02 UFL era. And well, he's gone 7-3 or better in every season. Now, yes, while there are huge talks about him being a bit of a Mike McCarthy in a sense of great regular seasons and then terribly blowing the end of the season, whether it be the Dragons Week 9 in the XFL, whether it be the playoff games in 24 and 25, what can't be denied is the fact that his 7-3, 7-3, and 8-2 record is only bested by Skip Holtz with his time with the Birmingham Stallions. That is the only coach that's been able to be more consistent and have great records. That's it. So Becht in the regular season is the 2nd best coach in all of football right now for spring football. And in terms of the offense, which again, he is more of an offensive guy, the offense hasn't been as good as advertised every year. Basically, every single season, it feels like they're still a solid unit, but they're a bit underachieving, especially 2024 is a really down year. 25, big mistake made in the quarterback decision by getting rid of AJ and basically publicly saying that he was the reason the team couldn't win games, just to end up losing because he didn't have AJ, which was ironic. But the bottom line is, yes, the offense hasn't been great, or as great as it's supposed to be, but this team is still winning, and he is a big part of this team being as good as they are. I said it before, I think he is the 4th best head coach in the league. Well, now 3rd with the whole Shannon Harris news. Bottom line is, he is still a great coach for this league. He is one of the guys that talks about the league the most outside of it. He, along with like Mike Nolan, basically talk about this league whenever they get asked about anything. His time with the Jets, of course, helping him as that radio guy, so really cool to see another AF guy. But now we have another guy from the Orlando Apollos, and that is Scott Spurrier. You want to talk about the one guy that I think a lot of you probably don't even realize was an AF to UFL guy, or was even in the UFL, is Scott Spurrier. Not only has he been in it, but he has been in basically every single season of the spring football era. 2019, he was Steve Spurrier's son, obviously son of the legendary coach, and he was the tight ends coach for the Apollos. Now, the tight ends for them did not do nearly as well as the Fleet did, as Scott Orndorff was the only guy that was actually up there on their 100 yards or higher, and he only had 130. But the Apollos, as mentioned before, were an insane team. 388 yards per game. Even if your tight ends don't have a ton of yards, a lot of that is because of the other stuff they like blocking, and again, this was the best offense in the league by a country mile, and he was a big part of it. But afterwards, he would go on to go to the Arlington Renegades, where he has been every single season. 2020, he was the tight ends coach for Dallas. Then in Arlington, he was both the tight ends coach and special teams coach. And now he is just the special teams coach, and he has been both years of the UFL. During that time, he did see Marquette King become an all-UFL punter in 2024 and was still a great punter in 2025. Both years had very solid kicking, not the best kickers in the league, but very solid. In 2020, Donald Parham was one of the best tight ends in the entire league and just best receivers, being 3rd in overall receiving yards. And then, of course, Sal Cannella was incredible, having 415 yards in 2023. So basically every season with the Renegades, he's had at least one guy be basically up there as a really good player at their position that he has coached. Again, he has been in spring football every single season in this ultra-modern era. One of the very few guys that can actually say that, whether it be player or coach. Most of the time, it's guys who end up not being in one year, whether not in the 22 USFL, not in the 2020 XFL or the 2019 AF. He's been one of the very few guys that has been in every single season, the AAF, XFL, XFL again, USFL, USFL again, well, either that or XFL, and the UFL both years. Insanely impressive. That's Scott Spurrier. But the last one we have to talk about is Will Lewis, the only real front office to front office person. Whereas Daryl Johnson took a front office position and ended up parlaying that to being a higher up in the league itself, Will Lewis went from being a GM to, well, a GM. Now, originally, he was the Memphis Express GM. Of course, the Express, the famous Johnny Manziel situation, all that. Team was not great, went 2-6. But then he would be the assistant director of pro personnel for the Roughnecks in 2020. And of course, the Roughnecks team, very famous, the PJ Walker Roughnecks. 5-0. Of course, one of the biggest what ifs. What if they played the Orlando Apollos of 2019? Would have been a fantastic game. Insane right there. While he wasn't the head guy of the Roughnecks, he was a big part of it and, of course, helped lead them to being such a good team. Now, he would be out of spring football for a year, but would be back with the director of player personnel for the Brahmas. Now, this would be another lower-end one, as the team did go 3-7 with the head coach of Hines Ward. They were technically in the playoff race at Week 10, though they were not able to get the W when it mattered at the end of the season. If they did, they could have made it, but it is what it is. They lost. And then in 2025, he took over Lionel Vital to become the GM of the Houston Roughnecks. The Roughnecks got rid of their GM because of that 1-9 record and would go on to help improve the team to be 5-5. And a lot of that was him. As everybody knows, basically, Curtis Johnson kind of bumbled his way into that 5-5 record, mainly because of players that Will Lewis added to the team. The defense was massively, basically the whole team was overhauled. J.M. McClendon, a quarterback he brought in, proved to be an incredible addition. Once he played, he was clearly an incredible player. The Justin Hall trade was a steal. Or not the Justin Hall trade, but the Marcus Sims trade was a steal. It is a shame that injuries kind of sidelined that, but at the moment, and even now, it is still wild they were able to get him for just a random alignment. A lot of the reason this team went all the way up to 5-5 was because of him. Now, the one downside, knowing Will Lewis's history, that means the 2026 Roughnecks are going to be terrible, but then the 2027, wherever he goes, team is going to be great. Because so far, it seems that every other year he does great, or it's just that when he's with the Roughnecks, he does really good. Because again, getting this Roughnecks team to 5-5, a lot of that was because of him. Yes, the end of the season had a couple of bench players that they were going against, but the roster itself was overhauled because of Lewis, and it was a huge reason why the team was so much better. But overall, that'll do it for this video. This was 5 staff members that went from the AAF to the UFL. There's probably a couple more videos I could do with this one just with players. There's not really too many more guys that you can do, but there are still some, and I could also do a 2020 XFL to the UFL, which I might do in the future. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Think about becoming a community member for 99 cents a month. Exclusive video every month, bunch of other benefits. Think about joining my fantasy football league. I got links in the community post section of my channel, so you can go there. And as always, guys, have a great night.